Good afternoon, everybody. I'd really like you to use your imagination and imagine me as a 19-year-old girl, the one I was talking about earlier, who's reluctant to be here today, with long, dark, curly hair, strong-willed, feeling invincible, fearless, and quite sassy. Here she is. One March evening, I was driving to Nottingham to meet my friends for a school reunion, and I was really looking forward to it. Spending time with old friends, having fun, and staying up way later than I could ever imagine now. I was driving along, thinking about my day, singing at the top of my voice, because I'm an excellent singer when I'm on my own in the car. And I drew level with another car as I overtook it. As I became level with the car, I saw that their right indicator was on. And within seconds, they turned their car in front of mine. I panicked, held my breath, and braced myself for the impact. Thoughts went through my head like, this is going to hurt. And this could be expensive. And my insurance is going to go through the roof. And this is my mum's car. Within seconds, the accident had happened, and it felt like an eternity. The cars collided, and the other car ended up on the opposite side of the road, off the road and facing mine. My car was in the middle of the road on the white lines. I was okay. I was shaken up, I was in shock, but I was okay, and it could have been worse. I got out of my car to go and check on the other driver, a lady whose head was bleeding, and her young son, who was also in the car with her, told me that they'd been turning into the farm track that leads to their house. I couldn't see how far away the house was down the farm track, so he went off to go and get his dad. And I decided to go and call an ambulance for the other lady, for his mum. I went back to my car, went through the driver's side into the passenger side to try and find my mobile phone, which had fallen on the floor during the impact. Whilst I was searching for my mobile phone, and this was so long ago it was like a house brick, so it wasn't that difficult to find, but while I was looking for my mobile phone, another car, driven by a guy who was late for his shift, at over 60 miles an hour, drove between the two cars and hit the car door that my legs were dangling out of. I had no idea what had happened. All I knew was that the pain was excruciating, and my legs felt like they were going to burst, and so did my head. So I was in the car with excruciating pain, and all I wanted to do was put my feet down on the ground and stand up. And thankfully, somebody stopped me. It later transpired in hospital that my left leg had been smashed with the impact of the door and had multiple fractures and had taken the brunt of the force. There was a real possibility that night and conversations about whether or not my leg would need to be amputated. And if not, what could be done to save it? Over a prolonged period of time in hospital and several different procedures, including the fitting of an internal interlocking nail between my knee and my ankle, and lots of physio. Over a long period of time, eventually, physically, I began to recover. However, emotionally and mentally, I took much longer to heal. I was broken. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think straight. I was low in mood, I was anxious, I felt out of control. And that young, sassy woman, that 19-year-old woman, had gone, and I didn't know who I was anymore. Coupled with that, I also knew that life could change in an instant, and there were no rules as to what would happen when it did. So I accessed therapy. The first therapist, a man, I worked with for some time. He took me out for lunch, he bought me dinner, he advised me, he told me to apply to go to university, and generally worked in a way that I later discovered when I did my own training to be a psychotherapist was unethical and unprofessional. It ended with him making a pass at me. I think that might have happened quite a few times during the time we worked together, but he must have been disappointed because I was too unwell to spot them. I was still struggling, having flashbacks and reliving events from the car accident and also from my hospital treatment. So I accessed therapy again. This time I saw a woman in a doctor's surgery. About 6 sessions in, she fell asleep. And I don't just mean that she nodded off. I waited for her to wake up. When she came round, she told me that she'd had a bit of a difficult weekend and she was quite tired. So I decided this time not to avoid the situation, that I was going to follow the complaints procedure and see this through. So I did exactly that. I made a formal complaint and booked an appointment to go and speak to the therapist face to face to talk about how I felt about what had happened. I was very nervous about this conversation. I arrived at the surgery to be told that she had double booked me, so she couldn't see me. And added to this, she didn't actually know that a complaint had been made. Even after these awful experiences of therapy, for some reason, I still felt that therapy could be helpful to me. But I wasn't actually sure at this point what therapy actually is. I embarked on my own psychotherapy training, and several million years later, here I am in front of you today with my own therapy business, working with great people, some of which are in the room. At this point, I think it would be a good idea to talk about what therapy actually is. Therapists help people to help themselves. They provide a very different kind of relationship to the ones that we have in other parts of our lives. A therapeutic relationship is different to any other. When we talk to friends and family, they have a vested interest often in what we should or shouldn't do and might advise us. But actually in the therapy space, this isn't the role of the therapist. The opportunity to work with somebody who is completely vested in what you need and what you want to do, and to understand what is happening for you. A big part of this is about empathizing with the client, therefore being able to walk in their shoes, or at least walk behind them and at the side of them to understand what is going on. But also to be able to take a helicopter view, so to be able to observe, reflect, challenge, and generally support the client in being congruent, which means to be genuine and honest. Clients will often come for therapy with lots of different metaphors for how they're feeling, and one of them is about a box of overflowing emotions. Emotions and vulnerabilities that are boxed off and have been boxed off consistently over a period of time. And part of therapy is helping the person to be able to unpack that box and work through it, but also to recognise vulnerabilities, to be able to embrace them and accept them as part of who they are. Clients will come with coping mechanisms, some of which I'm sure we can all relate to. We might just be avoidant, so we just pretend it isn't happening. We might self-medicate after a stressful day and come home and have a glass of wine, or maybe even a bottle. That's not just me, is it? No, okay, good. We might be under-eating, overeating, generally have disordered eating. We might have low mood, be very anxious. We might isolate ourselves and generally have signs and symptoms that will be different and individual to each of us. Often clients will come saying, I want to get back to how I was before I started feeling this way, or before the accident happened, or the incident happened. And this is really tricky because we can't unlearn or delete our experiences or how we feel. And we cannot and must not set ourselves the impossible task of trying to re-establish our previous identity, because it's not something that's actually possible. Who here has tried to fix a piece of pottery using super glue? Come on. Trying to line up the edges, hoping you've got all the pieces, trying to create an invisible mend. Now, if we think about this in the context of mental health, it's probably what we try to do a lot of the time, is create an invisible mend. However, if we thought about this in a different way, using the kintsugi metaphor, kintsugi is a Japanese term from the 15th century and means golden joinery, and is literally the art of fixing pottery using gold and silver. Now, if we think about the original pot, in this case, this kind of black vase, we have a plain black vase. After repair, the vase has more interest, it's more intriguing, and maybe even more beautiful as a result of what has happened to it. If I had a piece of pottery for each of you in this room, they would all be different. They might have bits and pieces knocked off them. There might be different shapes and sizes, different colours. They might be patched with other pieces of pottery. They might have cracks and fractures that are in the process of healing, have fully healed, and some of which may never heal. They may also have breaks that continually break in the same place all the time, especially if the original repair was superficial. Either way, I would hazard a guess that the piece of pottery would represent each of you individually and they would all be different. So, but would they be Kansui? Are they healed with gold and silver, or are they fixed with super glue? I often hear from clients that what has happened to me, I don't want it to define me. And as we've just seen in that image, if we're using that metaphor, how can it not define us or influence us in some way? And I felt the same. After my accidents and things that happened before and since, these things won't define me. But actually it has. How can we not be influenced and defined by something that has happened to us and has led us down a certain path? I wouldn't have trained to be a psychotherapist had I not had my accident and my poor experiences of therapy. I also wouldn't have the drive, I don't think, to make the profession as ethical and as professional as possible. I also have a fulfilling career and I love what I do. Mental health is often the elephant in the room. It has a stigma attached to it. And although this is improving as time goes on, it's still there at times. And clients will talk to us about the stigma being about being judged and feeling weak. And for me, it's about how do we encourage the conversations around how people are feeling. People will often say, I knew that they were struggling, but I didn't really know what to say. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't want to make matters worse. But actually, if we approach somebody in a human way, we do actually know a bit about how they might be feeling, because we're a human too. And if we don't know what to say, can't we start with that? In each of our therapy rooms, we have elephants in the room, soft toy elephants and ornaments that remind us about the questions we maybe could ask or the things we could explore. So, what might not be being spoken about here? If I'm sat with, a client or family or a couple, what else is going on here? How can I facilitate a conversation about this elephant that potentially is in the room that we're not acknowledging or we're not talking about? And that's really what therapy is about. And being able to recognise, where those invisible mends are and being able to help somebody to be able to explore them and work on them and improve them. Another thing I regularly hear is, I wish I could go back to normal, or go back to the original pot. Two things I have an issue with for this. The first thing is, I'm not really sure what normal is. I've not come across it yet, so I'm not sure that it actually exists. And the second thing is that if we assume that how we're feeling now isn't normal, is abnormal, then how can we actually accept how we're feeling as a result of what's happened to us? So I'm always really keen to rephrase that and reframe it. Actually, what you're feeling right now is natural because of what's happened. And it doesn't feel nice, it doesn't feel good, but actually it's a process that you're working through and that you will, that's what we're working on together. Something else that might illustrate this is that we often work with parents, and I see parents taking their children to school, and I've done this myself, I have 3 children, and created this little perfect being that we're going to shove into education at 4 years old or even younger than that. And parents can become very anxious about the ability of their child. Are they going to be able to make friends? What capacity do they have? Are they going to be able to keep up? Is the teacher going to like them? It's not just me who thinks these things, is it? No, okay, good. So they send their child off into school and the parent can become very anxious, and that then can feed into the child, and school can become actually quite a scary place. However, if we viewed our children differently and recognised that at some point they are going to maybe have bits knocked off them and be buffered about and maybe made more fragile, or they might even be toughened up, that if we accept that that is what's going to happen to them, then we can maybe support them. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do what Peter Kay talks about, which is to say to them, don't worry about the monsters under the bed, it's the burglars you need to worry about. I'm not suggesting that we set them up in that way, but what I'm saying is that if we can recognise that actually that is what they're going to need and that's what we're there to do, with a secure attachment that can always help to stabilise those breaks and cracks, then that might be a different way of viewing our mental health. What is this child and what do we need in order to be able to function and improve? Now, I recognise that, you know, we have physical pain. And when I had my physical pain, it took a long time to recover. It took probably quite a few years, really. But actually, if we acknowledge that mental pain also takes time to recover and gave ourselves that time, what would that be like? You know, we're trying to get back to work quicker, we're trying to do these things as fast as possible, but actually recognising we do need some time to heal. Added to this is that, you know, we can maybe look at this Kansui jar here and think about, you know, who can help us with the gold and silver that's going to help us to heal and be able to help us to move forward and to get better than maybe we are. Now, I recognise that if somebody is ill at the moment, mentally unwell, that they might be unable to get out of bed, maybe unable to work, might be feeling isolated and withdrawn, and may feel a million miles away from being able to put themselves back together. What I'm suggesting is that actually it's about us recognising that at some point we will need to be put back together, and we might need some help in order to do that. And who can help us with the gold and silver and actually celebrate the mends and celebrate where these experiences have brought us to, rather than preferring an invisible mend.